I've been doing loads of graffiti practice and study recently, which you might have seen on my Instagram account. So when Winsor Newton got in touch and asked me to do yet another promo for their Inspired by Promarker competition, I thought, I'm going to go with graffiti. They wanted something completely different to what I'd already done, so I thought I would do some kind of abstract shaped graffiti for them instead. So after doing a few rough versions, I penciled out the final version on this Bleedproof marker paper, and I started going over all of the lines using a 0.5 marker-proof fine liner. And then what I wanted to do was emphasize the exterior outlines. So I went over with a 0.7 thickness fine liner and just made sure that all of those exterior lines were nice and thick. Then I decided I'd put in the shadows straight away. So all I did here was choose a kind of a medium grey. I think it's cool grey number 3, and I just went and did all the shadow areas. I've been inspired by another piece of graffiti work that I'd seen that used a palette that was really warm yellows and oranges and quite strong kind of pinks and purples. So I decided that I was going to use a similar colour scheme. So the first colours that I put in were those yellows and oranges on the stars that you could see. And then I started using my purple palette. So I'm going to list all of the markers in the description below so you can see every single colour that I've used. But I decided I'd go from a sort of really deep dark purple to then a very, very shocking pink and then a pale pink. And this little sphere, this little circle in that top left, that was coloured in as though it was kind of like a sun, and that was going to be my light source that would affect the highlights and the shadows on all the rest of the picture. So here you can see me popping in oranges and pinks, trying to blend from orange to pink, and also spotting some really dark bits of purple across the whole picture. Because I was quite conscious that I didn't want to overload it with too much dark purple. So what I would do is just put kind of patches of that dark purple across the entire graffiti. So I decided to do that early doors so that I could see where the dark areas were before I started trying to add any of the other colors. And here you can see me starting to make some of my shadows a bit darker. Like I said, considering that glow, that yellow ball that I've done on the top left is the light source, that would let me know which edges were going to be a darker grey. So I've gone in and done some cool grey 4. So here you can see me putting in a few shadows for things to show that things are closer to you and above some of the other objects in the picture. This bit is just a close-up so you can see some of the kind of blending that I'm trying to do, which is a lot easier when you've got enough kind of transitional colours, enough colours to make it a nice gradual change from dark to light. But I did kind of have a constant problem doing this with the shocking pink, the one you could just see me using now, because that didn't transition very easily from the purple that I was using before, the Mulberry. So what I need to do is make a mental note to try and get something that's in between shocking pink and Mulberry for kind of doing future transitions, because it was a lovely shocking pink and I wanted to use it because it just had this really nice bright color for graffiti, but it didn't kind of blend as well as I wanted it to, just purely because I didn't have the colors that were either just lighter than it or just darker than it. Here you can see me putting in some orange and yellow because I'm conscious, again, I want a contrast between areas that are purple and pink and then areas next to it that should be orange or yellow or just darker in tone. So I'm trying, as I sort of bounce around the picture doing each of the individual shapes, I'm trying to do maybe pinks and purples in amongst yellow and orange just to give that kind of color contrast. So here you can see me spotting areas of yellow, which means doing certain shapes, certain patches of yellow, and then I know that as I come in to do the bits in between that are still white at the moment, they're going to be a different color. Like they're going to be, like you can see now, they're going to be a pink to purple kind of transition. So I've got those kind of contrasts, and it doesn't all end up with a big patch of yellow in the picture or a big patch of pink or purple. You know, it's sort of dotted around. It's hopefully an even composition with colors changing regularly and providing those kind of contrasts and areas that are going to provide a bit of interest, because you're like, oh look, that's, you know, strong purple, and then bam, it's you know, cornered and bordered by these yellow and orange bits. So I'm actually trying to approach this in quite a structured way. You know, I'm not doing any of my detail-y bits or my highlights yet. I'm just getting all my base colors done first of all, so I've got a good idea of how the picture's looking. Then I start putting my embellishments in and my details. So here you can see me going in with a 0.5 and I'm adding these little black splatter patterns, again sparingly because it's black and I don't want to overdo it, but then I flip to start doing some splatter patterns using colors. So for instance, I'm putting orange on top of the yellow areas, and then I can use a POSCA paint pen here to go over some of the darker bits that I couldn't put marker over, but because that's a paint pen, I can put this lovely bright pink over the dark purples. And also to break up some of those kind of splatters so I don't overdo it with splatters, even though I do, I put in some kind of streaks that you can see me putting on some of the curved shapes. I put in those kind of streaks where it's a thick bar to a thin bar. And here I am doing my favorite bits, which is adding the white highlights. And I'm using a Pentel Signo white gel pen for this one because it gives a really nice opaque kind of white color. And as I said before, I'm using that yellow globe in the top left corner here to be my light source. So that gives me a really good idea of all the edges that are going to be white and all the edges that are going to be more shadowed. So that's what you can see me doing. And also another thing that I've learned how to do recently is add thicker areas to your highlights. So instead of them all being the same kind of thickness of white line, sometimes I make some of those edges much, much fatter, and so you get a much stronger white kind of patch on the edge of some of your letters, which is really good. It draws the eye, it makes perhaps some of those shapes a little bit more interesting. And I'll be alternating here between putting in white highlights, but also some areas where I think they needed a bit more splatter kind of dotting, and I'll be using the POSCA paint pens there as well. So I'm just using a pale pink or a pale yellow for the POSCA paint pens. This is a really enjoyable part of the picture because of course you're adding your little details, your embellishments. The base colors are pretty much done, and now you're just adding bits that hopefully really spark it off and improve it and make it look good. Adding the white highlights always gives the picture a pop and starts giving a little bit more of a kind of a look of a shine or 3D. And you can also add those little stripes and streaks that I keep adding there as well. And here you can see me using the pink POSCA pen to do some splatters that sort of hide the bad transition where my shocking pink meets I think rose pink, and it didn't quite work so well, didn't blend so well. So I thought, how can I hide that? Oh, I'll put a splatter effect over that later. So here as I change the camera angle, you can see quite clearly what I'm talking about in terms of the thickness of these white highlights and how I go from a very, very thin line to then fattening out some of these edges and some of these angles to give it that kind of almost a shine, like it's a bit of a tile, like a raised tile kind of effect. It's the best way I can describe it to some of those colors and some of those shapes that you can see. So when I'd done all of that, I scanned the picture with just a white background first of all, because I was going to add a different background. Here you can see me adding a lot of lime green just to cover the entire background with this nice green color first. And then I wasn't too sure if I would wreck it doing that background, so that's why I scanned it with the white background first before I started doing this green background. Here you can see me filling in some of the areas in between some of the shapes with a selection of darker greens, going from I think lime green to bright green and then forest green, and then just a final bit of turquoise in there as well, just a sort of bit of edging and some kind of streaks and lines just to give it a little bit more energy in those gaps in between. And with the rest of the background, I decided to do some streaks of green, sort of going from what would be the center of the picture outwards to the edge of the paper. And the way I did this was, wherever the edge of one of the shapes was dark, I left that lime green. When I moved on to a lighter shape, I would do a darker green. So that's kind of the idea of why it's kind of patchy and streaky in the background. And also the way that I'm shading here is I'm trying to leave some of those darker shapes as kind of a splatter, but then also moving into doing darker splatters over some of the lighter areas. Again, so I've got a contrast of areas that are sort of like light splatters and areas that are dark splatters. Here I am putting in Cool Grey 5 because I thought the shadows weren't dark enough, so I decided I'd just go right up to Cool Grey 5 and add that just to give it a much more kind of solid sense of 3D. And then again, going in with the turquoise and adding some kind of broken, sparky edging, so it almost looks like the shapes are kind of vibrating and moving a little bit in the center of the picture. And because I can't resist, just the last couple of bits of embellishments here, a couple of sort of like light flashes, kind of diagonally in line with the kind of yellow sun, the light source of the picture, and a few little scribbles. So that's it, pretty much finished. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. Hopefully you liked it and you'll share and subscribe. And you'll also find below some links to some of the other graffiti videos I've done, and also links to the actual competition on Winsor & Newton's website if you want to have a go. Thanks for watching.